So, your predecessor and up to current day, we are now full-time mayors.
Yes.
And I don't think many people knew that when you were doing it, you were a part-time mayor who had a full-time career. So, where was your office? And how did you talked a little bit about going in to pick up papers at the end
Well,
of the
the
day?
the offices originally were in the first city hall, which is where the police station, City Hall, is now. It was a much smaller building. And then when the council chambers were built, actually before the council chambers was set up in the fire station. We used the made big room there, set up tables, and that was the council chambers. When we moved to the new city hall, the mayor's office was upstairs. And early in my term, we bought what's now City Hall Northwest over by the Holiday Inn. And so that was the city hall because it had a lot more office space. They were very short on office space and everything else. So for example, the city clerk's office was always across the street when we were in the council chambers. And the only offices we had there, I think, was the mayor's office. So that was that disconnect was, I think, was very awkward. But we were my office basically for the rest of my term was over at City Hall Northwest, and but I was part time. I'd come in about 4:30 in the afternoon and spend 3 or 4 hours, and then whatever the other time, hopefully during the day, once in a while you could attend a meeting and stuff. But I didn't work in town, so that was always an issue. My last year, not necessarily by my choice, but I retired from Weyerhaeuser at the end of '96. And so in '97, the mayor's job was my only activity, and so I was able basically to do that full time. And I think looking back on that probably set the stage for shortly thereafter becoming a full-time job, even though that my last year I was only paid part-time. I think the mayor now makes probably as much in 1 year as I made in all 8 years, but that's a whole different deal. Yeah, you can't, you have to think about that. That's done. But I think it did set the stage, and that's probably been helpful from a regional perspective because, again, to go back, we don't have any problems inside the city. Our problems are all outside, and you have to go outside to solve it. And I think elected officials are far and away the best way of doing that. Our elected officials, talking with other elected officials.
Rowan, you and I have spent a lot of time sitting and talking about land use and why town looks the way it does now. And I have shared your stories with a lot of people. So I wanted to move into a few questions just about our land. What is the biggest change you've seen in your time in Issaquah?
Well, I think the biggest change has been the urbanization of the community. And that stems from, I think, a failure to understand by, I would say, basically everyone, to understand and appreciate the effect that I-90 would have on us. And moving it from Gilman Boulevard over to the freeway, and what that did to allow other people in the community access to other areas and it really increased the growth pressures on us. And I think that we're still one of the more attractive places to live in all of King County, even with all everybody has traffic issues. And that's another thing on its own. But we have the Issaquah Alps, which Harvey Manning named for us. I didn't appreciate it much at the time, but looking back on it, I think that's instrumental because when you just say the term Issaquah Alp, you immediately visualize a picture. And it's a very positive picture. And I think from the community standpoint, that's important. To the extent that we can visualize in other people our vision, is very helpful in getting people to buy into that vision. And I think this Alps has been instrumental in maybe, I just think about this right now, maybe along with I-90 have been the two issues that have had more effect on us, becoming a trailhead city, for example, and all of the emphasis on the parks, recreation, and the activities around because of the 3 mile Isqua Alps.
So let's talk a little bit about the gravel pit on the north side of I-90. I get asked a lot of questions about that, Rowan. So tell me some stories.
We didn't actually finish the question about the annexation, so that definitely there's an involvement there. The gravel pits, I guess there's two major companies involved with the gravel pits, and they were outside the city. When I moved here in the 70s, basically everything north of I-90 was outside the city except for the little piece over where the city shops are now, what we call Frogtown. Just a little slice there that happened to be across the city, across the what was now the freeway. And everything north of that was outside the city. And the gravel pits been there for years and years and years and years. And in the early 70s, there was middle 70s, probably middle 70s. Apparently they wanted to increase capacity, and so anyway, they needed a water supply. They were using apparently their own wells at the time, but they wanted a more substantial water supply. So they came to the city and asked to annex to obtain the water. At that time, you had to annex to get the water. And so the city, I think there's always been a love-hate relationship with the gravel pits, even though they were outside the city. And so the basic response from the city was, well, yeah, we provide your water if you annex. But by the way, we think your gravel pits are ugly. And I don't think we're not going to give you the zoning that they wanted in order to do what they wanted to accomplish at the gravel pits. So anyway, the company, both gravel pits, they sat there and stewed with a scab on their nose, as it were, from what the city's response was. And then in, I guess about 77, 78, Water District 82, Fire District 10, Water District 82, which is now the Sammamish Sewer and Water District, obtained a permit from the state to drill their first well down on the valley floor. And it's just north of the I-90 Front Street interchange and south of the development that's Lake, whatever the commons, that area there. And so when they drilled that well, they had to put the water pipe up the hill to service which was all on the plateau at that point. They're all their service area. And so they talked with the gravel pit owners and said that if the gravel pits would pay for the piping in front of their property, which is pretty significant, a lot of area, a lot of lineal footage there, that they would provide water to the gravel pits to do what they wanted. This was acceptable to them, obviously, and so they said that we agreed to do that. And what I remember is my first month on the council in October of 79 was sitting in the King County Council chambers before the Boundary Review Board while the city argued that the city should be the provider of water, not the Water District 82. And unfortunately, we lost. It was too late. And so the Boundary Review Board agreed with the Water District 82 And so that went forward, and they stayed outside the city. And as they say now, the rest is history. If we'd had done what we should have done, which was to annex them, give them what they needed to do what wanted, at least you'd have, it's our finger on the button, not somebody else's finger. And we may do it to ourselves, but at least we have control over that. And so what happened after that, of course, is Klahani went in, and all that area along where the north of the gravel pits, where Fred Meyer and all that development, all those apartments up on the hill, all the apartments behind the next to the lumber yard out there, that all happened in the county. And of course, it affects Issaquah, had a big effect on it, but we didn't have any control over it. I like to think it would look and handled substantially different if we'd have annexed that and been able to do that in the city. But we didn't, and we were still hung with those problems. And I think it also, because of the Klahani, for example, it also has an effect on that whole question of annexation of the south end of the plateau. I don't think that Sammamish as a city should have happened. That's exactly opposite to what the Growth Management Act said, which was that you concentrate in the existing urban areas and you have a rural divider. I forget what the term is, but so that you know when you leave one city and go through an open area and get into the other city. We did not want to become like California. And I think what's happened between Issaquah and Redmond with Sammamish, we're just like California. It's not quite as dense yet, but the fact is, you can't tell when you leave Issaquah, when you reach Sammamish, when you leave Sammamish and you reach Redmond. And unfortunately, from Sammamish's standpoint, they're in the middle of nowhere. Cities started because of a transportation network system, usually on the water or some other focal point. And yet in Sammamish, there's no focal point. Everything is outside Sammamish. They don't control any access or ingress from their city. Redmond controls everything on the north end. Issaquah controls everything on the south end. And it's really unfortunate because it's never going to change.
Can you tell us about the old Skyport where Pickering Barn and Costco are now?
Oh, the Skyport was a key factor, I guess, in my first election. I was elected to a 2-year term in November of '79. There with me were a 4-person slate elected for 4-year terms, and that was because of the Skysport. Which was the glider skydiving, little grass airfield where basically where Holiday Inn is now, and Lowe's was where the airfield was. And the hope was that we could maintain that facility. I think the key issue was probably they were elected primarily because of their opposition to the development of the Skysports. And I think talking with other council members, I would hope this is an example of what, if you want to get involved with the city, for example, don't be a single issue candidate, because what will happen is, I don't care what your issue is, in this case there was the Skysports, you will spend about 5% of your time on that issue, 95% of the time on something you have no interest in. And so what happened, of the 4 people that were elected with me in November '79, 2 of them left within 2 years. And I think one of the main reasons, because they were not involved with what they were interested in. And I think it's really unfortunate. But anyway, so that it became less of an issue after they left, the 2 of them left. And so it was still an issue, but it trundled along, but it was not as and that was not as much of an aggravation, I guess, after the first couple of years. But the first 2 years, it was terribly difficult. My first 2 years, when I was in January of '80, I was third senior on the council because of my 3 months before the my month before the election. And so there were four of them. There was one person on the council already who was basically a Sky Sports supporter. And so every council meeting was a major drag, because there was always wanting to do something with that. But that land use, things happen slowly. You have to follow timelines. And so there's all this other stuff they weren't interested in. But our council meetings would routinely run until 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And luckily, my wife came down. Our kids were old enough that the oldest are babysat. So my wife would come down and she'd be crocheting Christmas presents and stuff during the council meetings. And then at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd get home and we'd open a bottle of wine and have some crackers or something, and it'd take another hour and a half to unwind so you can go to sleep. But it was routinely that. It was like pulling teeth, because there was so much opposition between the council and what they wanted to accomplish and what was actually able to do. And in fact, there wasn't a lot of interest in the rest of the city's business. And it was a very difficult 2 years in particular. And after the two people left, and then the people that were elected to replace them were not so involved. But what happened to Sky Sport eventually, in my opinion, it amounted to, it became a constitutional property rights issue. The business was owned by one group of people, and the property, the land, the Pickering property, was owned by another group of people, the developer at that point. And so they were in conflict. And I think the conflict became so, I won't say heated, but it became so difficult that the landowner made the decision they're not going to work with the property owner, period. And so at that point, when it comes down to it, and the Constitution goes, the property right, it goes to the property, not to the business. And so regardless of how you felt about the business as being appropriate to the site, which is some question about that before I-90. Now with I-90, it would obviously be more of a question. But from my decision, they said, well, you have to go with the property. It goes with the property and not the land, not the business owner. And I think that was probably key in resolving that. Eventually went away in the late 80s, and the land sat vacant until we started the corporate part. And now they say, the rest is history.
So, Rowan, were you in office when the pool was built, the community center, the new library?
Okay. Yes, the pool actually was built back in the 70s under King County Forward Thrust Program. The community center was built during my time, and the library actually was built after my time. But we can talk about those. But go back and look at the pool. The county had pools all over. I don't know how many there was. It could have been a dozen of them, I suppose. And after the 20 years or so between Forward Thrust in the 70s and the middle 90s, the maintenance issues were starting to eat the county's revenues. And so they were looking to divest themselves of all their pools. And I think Issaquah was the first, if maybe not the only, community or city that would step up and buy it. Carrie Anderson, our parks director at the time, was very interested in pools and in programs, and was, I think, one of the keys that we were able to get the pool and integrate it into our Parks and Rec program. And I think it's been very successful. I'm very pleased that it's worked out that way. But there was a lot of question at first because of the costs involved and the maintenance of the pool. There's always a lot of maintenance involved. But the fact that it was next to the community center that we built in the middle '90s was helpful. I think the community center would not have been built without for Skip Rowley and the Rowley Enterprises. He was instrumental in pushing that up. It became obvious that we needed to do something like a community center for the community, and so he was, I think, really key in pushing that and helping us to get that taken care of. I think it's also been a very successful program, and the location with the pool, I think, has been part of that. I'm very pleased about that. The library started, originally was where the senior center was. Seemed to me there was something before them, but I don't remember too much about that. But when the senior center was, the library went into the senior center building, it was done as a 20-year project, with the idea that they would subsequently move and enlarge it someplace else. And at that time, the commitment was made that when that happened, the city would turn it into the senior center. Prior to that time, the senior center had been the little building, which is the on the east side of Memorial Field, where the
We have a
grandstands had been.
Yeah, we have a daycare there now.
Basically, it was two rooms or whatever, with a little kitchen, and so that worked out really well for the city, I think, and for the seniors, having the senior center. And then the library, of course, built the big building on the corner of Front and Sunset. That was not the original idea what was going to go in there. And I think even when it did go in, originally there was supposed to be a couple of small shops, retail, as part of it. I don't remember too much about why that came out. It fell out of the plan and ended up just being all in the library. And then, of course, the lot to the west of it is now the parking garage. And from my standpoint, my dissatisfaction there, it's not a very good streetscape for people walking, even though it's been landscaped and everything else. It's not particularly attractive to have that as a type of facility there. But that is a library, and I think it's been very successful. The central location is great. It's too bad we couldn't have had a post office in a more similar location downtown. The more we can do downtown, I think, keep downtown vibrant, would be helpful. I'm very pleased that we have the Village Theater downtown, for example. If we didn't have the Village Theater, I'm not sure we'd have it downtown, frankly. And the more that we can do as we redevelop downtown, to keep that active and vibrant, it will support the whole city and help the whole community, I think. But yeah, those were, at least the first two, were at least happened during my time.
Rowan, you were a forester for Weyerhaeuser, and you probably have some thoughts to share with us on our city's history of forested hillsides and our city's designation as Tree City, USA.
Well, I'm very pleased that we are a tree city, but at the same time, my forestry background is, I have a little different viewpoint. To me, timber trees anyway are something that we have a use for, and we should make use of them and not just let them look at them. They provide a lot of opportunity for us. We wouldn't be able to exist without trees, for that matter, just from the products they give us. But how we get that's another issue that is different. And I think we started because of the Tree City, we passed I think a rather significant tree ordinance. And I've always felt, for example, that one of the paragraph, the elements in the tree ordinance should be that a landowner should be able to remove any tree that he or she planted. I say that because I planted a couple of trees on my property that were like that are now like this. And in the 47 years I've been there, but that's just my opinion. Other than that, I think that I would hope that the city has a lot of property up on Lake Tradition, for example, and also maybe even over in a place like the Berksman like that, though. We should be sensitive to the opportunities of managing that land and not just leave it sit vacant. It's not old growth. It's all been cut over. And so it's been harvested at least once, in some places twice. And some of the places where I've been with Weyerhaeuser, they're now harvesting a third time. And so, things change, and I think we need to be sensitive to those opportunities. But that's not necessarily a popular view.
Rowan, what's your personal approach to governing and decision making? And then how would you counsel or mentor new council members?
Well, I think as mayor, I noticed it in particular that the staff always wants to know what the mayor likes. What does the mayor want to do? And I always tried to tell them, for example, that what I like is really not important at that point. To me, the first question they ask is, what are the facts and data? When you have an issue, what do the facts and data tell us about that issue, and go about solving it or working it. Maybe you don't solve it, you can work it. I'm sure we solve anything. You just massage it and do part of it, and then something else happens. The law of unintended consequences is there. But what do the facts and data tell us about it? Secondly, if what action we want to take, is it legal? Or maybe it's not legal, but because we are also a legislative body, it may not be legal now, but we made it illegal, we can therefore make it legal, change it. So it becomes legal. And if that's still doable, then the next question I think you ask is it feasible? Do we have the resources to accomplish it? Maybe I want to go to the moon, but we don't have the resources to accomplish that. So from the city standpoint, it ain't going to happen. Regardless of how well I like it, it's not going to happen. So assuming that it's legal and it's feasible, and the facts and data then give us an answer of what we can do, then I ask myself, how do I like it? But if I ask myself, how do I like something, first off, I think you end up tilting at windmills, like Don Quixote. And I don't think we have enough issues and problems to work on that we don't need to spend our time tilting at windmills. And I think in that same regard, for example, I see myself as a fiscal conservative, a social liberal or progressive, and but the third component of that is I have libertarian tendencies. And to me, as you look at the problem, in the first question, the first response is, one, don't throw more money at it. Two is don't necessarily look to government to solve the problem. I don't think it's government's job necessarily to solve problems. It's government's job to facilitate the provision of services, not just to provide the services. And I think, if you look at how we work with the food bank and the history museums and organizations like that, that's the opportunity. Find somebody else. Government is not efficient. You don't want government efficiency, because efficiency in government comes at the expense of the electorate. Nothing more efficient than a totalitarian government. And as residents, I don't think we want that. What we should ask is, we want government to be effective. And the difference between being efficient and being effective, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. And if you're not doing the right thing, it doesn't make any difference how well you do it, it's still the wrong thing. And I think that's key to keep that in mind. I've done a lot of thinking about those kind of things since I finished my term, and it's become a lot more clear now than it was then necessarily. And as far as, to me, I think it's important that the city, where the city staff under the mayor provides the services to the council, and I think that's important. I would hate to see that change, because if and when council ever obtains their own staff, the first thing that happens is that staff has to prove their worth, which means they find fault with whatever the mayor's staff, the administrative staff, comes up with. And so you have a tug of war that not necessarily in the favor of the residents. So I would hope that the mayor's office always provides whatever staff resources and information that the council wants, because I think it's really important that we maintain that. If you get large enough, eventually it probably becomes difficult, but I don't see us ever hopefully becoming that large. But I would hope that. The same thing, I think, I really like our system of government, the mayor council, as opposed to the council manager form. I think the opportunity is there, again, between the council and the mayor, that we need that tension, as it were. But from the mayor's standpoint, sometimes you need to gore an ox, put a lot of blood on the floor, and get some bad publicity, get people excited about it, but then you start learning you learn all the facts and data that you need. And until you get all that out, you're not necessarily going to come up with the best answer. It's not pretty, but I think it is necessary. And I don't think the council manager form of government provides that same opportunity, because the manager there's a concern about losing the job. As the mayor, you're there for 4 years. And I think, my winning by 14 votes and still worked out is an example of that. If you do your job to the best that you see that is available. And then I still miss my 8 years as mayor. I think it was the best job I ever had, because the opportunity is always, what do we want to accomplish today? Let's go do it. And it's there. It's up to us how we want to do that. And it's through the people that we work with that we're able to do that.
You've mentioned that many times to me, that it's the best job you've ever had. So how would you respond to a resident who says, I'm thinking of running? What advice would you give?
Oh, I think one is recognize that it's a very complex organization. And I said, go back, you don't want to be a single issue candidate, because you're not going to spend much time on whatever your issue is. And so the opportunity is learn what all are the issues before the city, and how do we work all those issues. And I think also along that, I've always liked the idea that Issaquah is a small city. We always thought of ourselves as a small city, and from my standpoint, that to me, small is an attitude, not a number. And we started at like 4,000 or 5,000. I think now we're at 35,000. And but if we keep the attitude of the small city, I thought Kirkland, for example, they're even larger than we are. They've always had, I think, a concern about who they are and how do you maintain that, and done a really good job of that. And I think I would like to see us do the similar kinds of thing. The opportunities are always going to be there, and it's getting the people involved. And I think as council members, they need to remember you're a philosopher, you're a thinker, you're not a doer. And that's different from what we normally do. As people at our jobs and things, we're doers. And so even if you're a boss in a company, you're a doer as well as a thinker. But in the council, you're only thinking, what do we want to do? How do we want to do this? And then you look to the administration to go do it. You don't do it yourself. And so, but it's really different to think about that stuff. You have to think of it differently. And that's, I'm not sure it's particularly easy because it's not what we normally do. But it was a great job. I enjoyed my time in the council. I learned immeasurably on the 10 years I was on the council. I think it was a particularly, I don't know, the first word that comes to mind is rambunctious, because in my 10 years and 3 months on the council, I think I served with 29 council members. And to put that into some perspective, if I'd have served with all new council members on every 2-year council, the maximum number I would have served with would have been, the minimum number would have been 36. And 6 2-year terms because of my 3-month overlap. And at 6 members on the council besides myself as the 7th common member, that makes 36. I served with 29, of which we appointed, I think it was like 4 or 5. So it was, they were interesting times. And I think a lot of what happened, is what we see out here with all the annexations and stuff. It's not that we've grown that much inside the city. We've annexed for the most part, as all the people have come in. And I'm very pleased about that. When I started, I said I could see a city. I wanted to plan for a city of 80,000. People just roll their eyes at that. But one of the things I learned is certain questions you want to be, when you ask a question, I think what you look for is, what if I'm wrong in my decision, not what if I'm right? If I'm right on either side of the decision, it looks about the same. If I'm wrong on the decision, I think sometimes you get a very different answer. And when it comes to the size of the city, for example, I didn't want to plan for 20,000 and end up at 35,000, which is where we are now. But if I plan for 80,000 and we end up at 35,000, I'm very comfortable with that. And so I think you need to keep that perspective in mind. What if I'm wrong? Not what if I'm right? Because we're not always going to be right.
Rowan, we've been talking about having this conversation for at least 3 or 4 years. I am glad we got to do that today, and we got to hear all of your perspectives on what it means to govern, how the town has changed. So I just wanted to thank you for sitting down and having a chat today.
And I guess the final thought is, I've always liked our city motto, and I would encourage you and anyone else to use it. We didn't go through a very big process to get it, but the motto was, at least during my time, was a special place where people care. And I really like that as a descriptor of Issaquah. I think it still applies, and I would encourage people to use it more. We will remain a special place as long as people care.